Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode of New Album Spotlight, the show where I put the spotlight on a new album in progressive rock or related genres that I think you'll like if you have similar tastes to me. Basically, just a chance for me to talk about the music I love and recommend it to all of you out there to showcase that there's great music being made today, that it wasn't all just made in the 70s, that there's still great progressive rock and clever, creative, adventurous music today. And I have a really good one. It's kind of a little bit off the beaten path, not probably in the typical like standard prog rock vein that I tend to talk about, but I'm really taken with this album, so I felt like I should mention it on the channel and give it its own spotlight. This is Black Country New Road and their album Forever Howlong. And this is an interesting band. They're a British band, and they're not really traditionally considered progressive rock, like I've mentioned. Maybe considered more of a post-punk style band. There's this windmill scene that people talk about that includes bands like Black Midi, and Squid is another one, and Black Country New Road kind of fits into that feel of these younger musicians doing stuff that's really adventurous and exploratory, and it's really fun music, you know, doing unconventional instrumentation, and it has a bit of a punky kind of chaotic kind of element to it in a lot of ways. A lot of times it has kind of a charismatic lead singer who has a very, very distinct sort of style. And what I'm really fascinated about with this band, which really brought me into their fold with Ants From Up There, which I thought was a fantastic record, had some extended pieces, had some really interesting proggy moments, and they had a very charismatic frontman, Isaac Wood. And he was their frontman for their first two albums, has a very almost dark kind of deeper tone and darker voice. Sometimes he'd get into this kind of spoken word section, very expressive and very distinctive. But he left the band after their second album, and they decided to forge ahead with the members they had and have kind of rebranded themselves in a lot of ways and created this new sound and style to them that still has some of the DNA from their first two records, but really forges a new path. And that started with a live album they put out called Live at Bush Hall, which came out in 2023, which was full of new material, which is kind of unconventional for a live album, because the band basically had to create new songs on the fly to be able to perform them, because they couldn't really perform their previous songs without Isaac Wood, since he was such an important voice for those songs to work. And the vocal duties and the main songwriting collective kind of became these three women who've stepped out front and have become an incredible group of writers and collaborators and musicians and singers that I absolutely adore and love. They're Georgia Ellery, who plays acoustic guitar, mandolin, tenor recorder, violin, and does vocals on this record. We've got Tyler Hyde doing some acoustic guitar, bass guitar, clarinet, harmonium, piano, tenor recorder, and vocals as well. And May Kershaw, who does some accordion, some harpsichord, piano, and vocals. So multi-instrumentalists, all supremely talented, all bringing their own unique stamp and style into the group. And they created different pieces that worked live for this live recording. And I thought it was a really cool, clever release. I'm not really as big a fan of live recordings, so I was really hopeful for their studio recording where things would sound a bit more well-produced and exactly in line with what they want to showcase. And I think this record bears that out. This is Forever Howlong, and I love how they divide up the tracks as written by the various three front women. They each have spotlights and different highlighted tracks that showcase their talent and their own unique perspective into the band. There's a lot of great lyrical work here that showcases a unique perspective. And they do have a bit of that indie rock perspective and aesthetic that, you know, is pervasive in that scene. But I think they do it in a very unique and clever way. I think they add a lot of cool little prog flourishes. You could hear a bit of like, you know, prog folk music in this mixture. You get a bit of chamber pop, and I love the different instrumentation that they use, that they don't just stick to like your standard, you know, guitar, bass, drums aesthetic. There's mandolin, there's saxophone, there's all kinds of harpsichord and accordion and banjo and all of these cool, unique instruments, some woodwinds being featured in different sections, which makes it sound very eclectic and very interesting. And you could imagine that to a lot of people, this could just sound very theatrical and very quirky and off the beaten path, but I think it works in their musical world and landscape. They definitely have this kind of interesting vibe, this kind of theater kid aesthetic, some very cinematic pieces here and some very quirky, just interesting sections. And I love how expressive the vocalists are in portraying the music and the storytelling that they're portraying. And what's interesting to me, I like how they released 3 singles from this record, and each of the 3 singles was written by a different member of this kind of songwriting trio. The first, and probably my favorite on the whole record, is Besties, and that one was written by Georgia Ellery. Just a fantastic poppy number. It has this kind of bright harpsichord. I love how it starts with kind of this understated harpsichord feel, and then it has this big burst of energy and sound that's just so joyful and expressive. And it's very much in this kind of 60s Baroque pop style form, with some horn stabs and mandolin thrown in for good measure. And it almost has like a Beach Boys style flair to it, but still exists within their own musical wheelhouse. So it's a really clever track. And even though it's short and more pop oriented, it's just such a beautiful opening to the album and a great opening single as well. They also released For the Cold Country as a single, which was written by May Kershaw. Lovely chiming a cappella vocals, kind of this almost old-fashioned kind of classical style to the vocals. There's some light sax added, some acoustic guitar, almost like this old-school madrigal style. Definitely has a big dramatic ending with horn stabs and a more dense arrangement as it reaches a fever pitch and then ends on those angelic vocals. So it's a beautiful 6.5-minute track that really explores a lot of different feelings and is a really fun expression for the band. And then Tyler Hyde had Happy Birthday was the other track that was released as a single. And this is another one with kind of a uplifting Baroque pop sort of feel. And it threads that needle between these kind of bouncier pop vibes and more densely lush orchestrated arrangements that are more sweeping and more grand and more, expressive in that fashion. So I love how they balance those elements. One of my criticisms for the previous iteration of the band, for the Isaac Wood iteration, was that sometimes it could sound kind of harsh to my ears. There's like these angular sounds, these kind of just very avant-garde and strange things that just don't sound very melodic and interesting to me. But this iteration of the band, I feel like, has a lot more emphasis on melody and on these beautiful soundscapes and these really pleasing instrumentation that speaks to me more as a listener. And their vocals, all 3 women here, are just fantastic singers, and their voices blend fantastically well together. And so it just makes for a really pleasing listen and a great combination of all these different facets of this kind of avant chamber pop kind of feel, this light folk rock, this kind of Baroque 60s sounding pop and Beatles influence. It's all mixed into this really interesting stew that makes it sound very unique and very singular in today's day and age. And that's why they set themselves apart to me, to the other bands in this windmill scene that they're a part of. Like Black Midi can sound very angular, very off kilter and off the beaten path, and sometimes hard to listen to. And Squid can get into that kind of a lane as well, another band in this scene that sometimes just sounds so discordant and so dissonant that it's hard for me to really enjoy on repeated listenings beyond just being fascinated by what they're doing. And that's where Black Country New Road kind of take it to the next level for me and my taste as a music listener. There's so many highlights throughout the record. Every track has something interesting. The Big Spin is a great chance for some off-kilter piano and great female vocals, some horn stabs, a whimsical feel, theatrical vibe. It's a good short track that showcases a lot of what the band's about. Socks adds a lot more of a theatricality, a lot more of this slow contemplative feel, and a lot of very expressive vocal, like kind of an art performance piece in a lot of ways, with this really quirky instrumentation behind it of violin, sax, and piano. Very cool track as well. Salem Sisters has a bit of that bouncier, poppier feel with some great vocal melodies and harmonies and a bit of a brighter vibe to kind of break things up. One of my favorite tracks on the record, and really all 3 tracks by Georgia Ellery are probably the highlight of the record for me. I already mentioned Besties as one of my favorites. My other favorite track is Two Horses, which has a more dreamy kind of acoustic feel, whispery vocals, a beautiful romantic sounding ballad, some whistling and mandolin accents, and just beautifully realized. Even though it still has that kind of quirky instrumentation the band's known for, it just has this really melodic sensibility and just sounds really beautiful. And I love this cool bass line that enters about halfway through to give it more of a driving feel. And it's just a beautifully realized track, one of my favorites on the record. I also love the final track, Goodbye, Don't Tell Me, also written by Georgia Ellery, which is a little bit more straightforward compared to a lot of the other tracks on the record. Has this kind of acoustic guitar and vocal feel, adding some beautiful melodies. It's very folk inspired, gorgeously performed, maybe a bit even country tinged in its sound. Just really beautiful and a great way to end the record as well. We get tracks like Mary, which also plays with this kind of country sound. A little bit maybe of some lap steel style guitar in there. Excellent female vocal harmonies as usual. I love how it builds in intensity as it continues, even though it has this kind of stripped down instrumentation. They still manage to ramp it up and convey the real strong emotions that the song is trying to convey. Nancy Takes the Night is another great track, a more extended piece with some beautiful acoustic guitar picking, some dissonant sounds in the mix, but it kind of works within this musical stew and continues to add to the beauty. I love some added saxophone and very thoughtful vocals, very complex musical arrangements as some shuffling drums are added into the mix, and it's just such an emotional journey as it morphs and weaves through the track. And then there's the title track, Forever Howlong, which has a little bit of an otherworldly kind of vibe to it, has these musical sounds. I don't know, maybe it's like recorders or something like that under a delicate vocal. There's this beautiful piano run that really sticks out to me, kind of classically inspired. There's a lot of room for space as there's giant pauses in the music as, they're really able to showcase this kind of stop and start style. And I just absolutely love all of these tracks. I think they have something very interesting, each one of them, and I just really feel joy listening to this record because it's very bright and positive and uplifting. Sure, there's sections that are a bit slower, more methodical, more dissonant, more different than you might expect from just a bright pop record, but I think it's balanced fantastically well. I think it fits within the realm of progressive rock because of the unique instrumentation and that they're not just doing standard 3-minute pop songs across the board. Some of these pieces are a bit longer, are a bit more theatrical and artistically crafted, and I really appreciate the aesthetic of the band, and it provides something a little bit different than my typical standard 70s sounding progressive rock. And I really love seeing young new musicians really exploring and doing things that are different and off the beaten path and finding success through it. That's always heartening to me and makes me hopeful that quirky, progressive, interesting, adventurous music can survive and thrive in the future, even when all of the older prog rock musicians are kind of dying out and passing the torch a little bit. We still have some really great music to look forward to and for new torchbearers in the scene. So thank you guys for joining me on this review. I hope you appreciated my thoughts on the album. A bit scattershot maybe, but I just want to convey that this is a beautiful record, and I hope some of you will give it a chance, even if it's not in your typical wheelhouse compared to what you listen to maybe in the prog realm. So thank you guys so much for listening and for being a part of the channel, and I appreciate everything you do for the channel, for me, for all of this, for music in general. Thank you guys, and I'll catch you hopefully in a future episode. Bye everybody, enjoy the music.